sex is a lot about energy, right? Sex is a lot about how you show up. If you want to get into the act of sex, what makes sex good is you understanding what you desire and what you enjoy out of sex, and showing up and understanding also what your partner enjoys out of sex and being able to give that. There's a ton of things when I generally say, let's talk about sex, that can be discussed here. But what I in particular wanted to talk about, and this is connected to some of the things, I mean, if you talk about sex, it's always a personal conversation. It always relates to the things that are happening in your life. And going through the sort of breakup that I went through definitely illuminated a lot of different things about the politic of sex and how it works in my life. And it particularly made me interested in this conversation around the idea of both sexual liberation, sex positivity, this, to the Sukihana side, the freak in the bedroom. But, that's what I was thinking of when I was like, let's talk about sex, right? This idea of how we very publicly talk about the sex that we have and how we accumulate or how we have power from said sex and the value we get from sex. And typically it's not even the value we get from it. It is how it allows us to value ourselves. And a lot of the discourse I hear around sex, for me, it lands that a lot of this is rather performative, as are many things, as are most things in life. And so I have been thinking through a lot this year, and I keep referencing, this book club and these author chats. You learn so much, right? And so when we were talking with Dr. Collins about her book, Black Feminist Thought, and she was reminding us about how we threw out all aspects of our lives because we are, and then we read Bell Hooks, who also talks about this in All About Love, about feeding into this idea of power and domination and how we consistently replicate these hierarchies in our lives, where we create these value systems that allow us to value ourselves over others. And this kind of intrinsically seeps into all of, this is the norm, this is the status quo, and unless you are consciously aware of it, you participate in this, right?
When you talk about vulnerable people, this is serious. Because what each one of us does trickles out to all of these other people in terms of the connections that we have. Look, it is upsetting when you know how bad the world is. I think you just have to assume you're already together with people. And if they are not ready to deal with you, you just leave them alone till they are. I hate to say this, but sometimes the direct conflict approach doesn't help you, because there are other people who want to get to know you, who never do get to know you, because you've been fighting with the ones who reject you. We have to really respect the process of how people really develop relationships and become committed. Because if I meet you on Tuesday and then I'm your buddy on Wednesday and I'm with you forever, my sister, I'm not convinced that you're going to be there on Thursday. So this is the whole notion of building relationships, and that takes time.
And then, Kiese in his author chat reminding us that we weaponize the language. That, we have all this language and how to talk about things, but what labor are we actually putting behind our words? What are we actually doing?
And I think sometimes the words, this is what I always say, knowing the language can make you a much more potent abuser of the person that you're trying to, in theory, communicate with in some liberatory way. I am definitely spending a lot of time thinking about how the practice and the theory do not necessarily align in any Black feminist I know. And in most Black feminist men I know, I'm thinking about how the understanding of the theory has allowed us to be more potent abusers of people. But the understanding of it has to manifest in a changed behavior. And again, I think that's daily, hourly work. I don't think it's a deliverance, you get there and then you never fucked up again. I think you have to commit every day, every single day, to being a loving, tender person with a radical Black feminist politic, with the understanding that that shit is fucking hard for Black feminists, not just Black men. There's certain things that we think or know to be true that we can't even say in a public space. I'm just trying to say that I think Black feminism is always trying to push and pull because of that tension. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I mean, this is where Bell Hooks' work is just like foundational. Like Bell Hooks understands that Black feminists fuck up Black feminists, and Black men fuck up Black women, right? But like those ain't the same things, right? Like they just, yeah.
And particularly to the conversation about sex, even when it does get into the realm of this sort of supposed Black feminist praxis. But like this idea that, the veneer of Black feminists talk about sexual liberation and, being able to have the prowess and the goddess in the bedroom and having this great sex and being really sexually in tune with yourself. And me trying to figure out, well, what do all these things mean? Right? Like, what are people actually saying when they say these things? And what I have personally concluded is that a lot of it is that people commodify the language of sex. They commodify this idea on all sides of the wavelength, where they are either selling you on the idea that they are some sort of extraordinary freak. So they are freaky in the bedroom. They do all these things because they've done all these things. They've been able to accumulate wealth. And so you should also pay to see how they do all these things in the bedroom, because clearly they are doing something extraordinary to be able to be seen as like a sex positive person in a way that nobody else is. So you should pay for their OnlyFans to see it. Right? So that's, you land on a Sukihana. To like the women that make, the doctors who are, the doctor sex. And I'm not knocking it. I think it, yeah, curate these conversations on sex. I do think there are things to be discussed here. But a lot of times, some of the time, we get the, I know how to give. It always goes down. There's a fascination with head, especially when it's coming from heterosexual women. I look at all my dildos. I know how to pleasure myself. The more supposed intellectual conversation about sex and how we have sex and about our comfort around sex and about women owning our power within the bedroom. Then back again to like hip hop and the way that we are going through this sort of renaissance of Black female rappers who are owning their power in their sex. But still, even though their music sort of suggests their right to demand, my pussy talks English, French, and Spanish, to make a nigga go Garfield, part like Garfield, all these ways in which we have references to like owning our vaginas and owning the power of our vaginas. But a lot of these women rappers still very much so talk about this sort of liberated sexual identity, though they still feed into very traditional norms in the way that they go about their daily lives and the way they promote their image outside of their lyrics. Word to Cardi B constantly taking Offset back. Word to how a JT is always tweeting about she not a freak like that, even though she rapped like that. And then on the other side of that, you do get a Sukihana who just says, well, no, I am what my music says I am, and pay so you can see it. To get to the point of where I'm trying to start this conversation off at, is that all of this in some way is very performative. And I don't know that any of it that I've seen thus far outside of, pleasure activism we're reading really does talk about the labor, right? So when I think about what pushes these conversations past the performative, is that anytime we create theories, there is a labor that you have to put behind the theory in order to make it a praxis or a day-to-day thing, like a thing that you put into your reality, right? I could have all these theories about Black feminism, but how am I employing them in my day-to-day life? What is the labor that I put behind these theories and put behind this language and all these words? I do feel like a lot of the sexual conversation, even when we are supposedly digging deeper, feels very performative, often because it's commodified to sell you on a concept, to sell you on an idea, to sell you on a set of services on all wavelengths of the conversation. And I think that is a structure of capitalism. People will pay for knowledge. I don't necessarily think it's wrong that someone has accumulated knowledge around sexual liberation and has made a profit off of the knowledge that they have accumulated because they have a right to be paid for their time and labor. I do wish we lived in a more equitable society where these conversations about exploration, and because it all roots back to your desires, how you see yourself, how you want to be seen in the world, about vulnerability, that we live in a more equitable society where we could create these conversations in a communal sense, that we wouldn't have to be tapping into paying someone for access to them. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. So I understand some of the necessity of the commodification. But what we have to be wary of then is that how much of this conversation is performative, is surface, and how much of it really just relies on a very carnal understanding of sex. Because exploring all this, I paid for Suki's. I paid for the OnlyFans account, okay? So what Suki does is she charges you per post. You do not subscribe per month. You pay $20, $40, $100 here. She got a good $120 out of me. That means I got a couple of videos. And then digging into like this sort of doctored sex talks and realizing that like there's really nothing extraordinary that anybody's doing, right? There is nothing superior that anybody is employing within their physical capabilities that makes the way they access sex so much better in a sense that they should be valued over you in this conversation about sex. I think people are doing the performance of the conversation around sex and the performance of the sex positive image because they want to be valued. And this is how they decided that they are going to be valued in society, by being a part of this conversation and being part of this conversation in a way where they show you that they have done work, or they have done something more extraordinary than what you have done in the way that you are interacting with sex. Sex is a lot about energy, right? Sex is a lot about how you show up. If you want to get into the act of sex, what makes sex good is you understanding what you desire and what you enjoy out of sex, and showing up and understanding also what your partner enjoys out of sex and being able to give that. I think even the way in which Sukihana performs the sexual acts feeds into a very traditional understanding of gender roles, right? In the way in which, like, I don't have a thing against porn. I don't think there's anything wrong with porn. A lot of it is still very subjugative of the woman, right? Like, I understand that the act of sex in itself is not a pretty act. It's not an act you need to go into trying to think you're going to look cute. Let that shit go. It's not necessarily an act that I would describe as a pretty act, right? So I understand, particular to porn, that there is going to be a very carnal aspect of it. But there's this a certain aspect of Black porn that feels very rapey. I don't necessarily walk away turned on by the sex because it often does feel like, hey girl, take this shit. And not the women, particularly around heterosexual sex, not the women really deriving genuine pleasure from the sex. Typically the pleasure is from how much can they throw it back. And I think unfortunately that does frame a lot of our men who, how are they socialized around sex? To connect this to the Duvall tweet, I don't follow them, but I do know that they do a lot of like the Black love conversation, that they've like collaborated with Belief in Fatherhood and Kev on Stage. And so that's typically my frame of reference for them. But there was a clip that popped up on my Twitter timeline where they on their podcast he's saying, why do women push their men towards monogamy if they are not going to keep up with their men's sexual desires? And that Duvall wants to have more sex than his wife, Kadeen, is interested in having.
Not allowed, based on our marriage laws and the contract we've signed with each other,
right,
to have sex with anybody else.
Right.
So these urges that come, I have to share them with the one person I decide to spend the rest of my life with.
Right.
So that brings me back to my soundbite.
Okay.
Right. I don't understand, and this is what we can discuss as a woman, because I don't want to say it's a man versus woman thing, but a lot of women do complain, oh, my husband's always on me. Why is he always on me? If sex is going to be a chore for you that you don't really want to do, why do women constantly push monogamy on men? If you know that you don't want to have to deal with him all the time just wanting you, why do you push monogamy on that?
Well, who's to say I pushed anything on anybody? Like,
well, we know that you pushed monogamy on me.
I pushed monogamy. I forced you to get married to me?
Time out. I didn't say you forced me to get married, but did you not say to me that you wanted to be engaged and you wanted to be married before you lived with me? You didn't say that?
I want $1 billion. That don't mean I'm going to get it. I can want something,
asking,
but not...
You right now you're dodging the question.
Nobody pressed you to do it. Yes, is that something I wanted? Yes, it was. But
you didn't press me. Are you gonna lie now to the people because we talking about sex?
DeVal,
you're gonna lie now to the people?
DeVal, knowing.
Kadeen, you didn't want monogamy?
Of course I did.
So then why are you avoiding the question?
That's not avoiding the question. I'm saying, does that mean because I want it and I requested that you were gonna deliver it? Like, nobody pressed you for that.
Time out. You just said you wanted it and requested it. Do you not hear yourself?
I can make a request. Is the request going to be granted?
Am I not granting you monogamy?
You are granting it to me.
So this is my question.
Look at your boy. Look at your boy.
This is my question. if you wanted monogamy,
Okay.
why would you want monogamy if sex is a chore for you? That's the question. You're avoiding the question.
I'm not avoiding the question, but at first you said women, or in general me specifically, are pushing monogamy on somebody. Okay, yes, that's something that I wanted, but I didn't press you for it and be like, DeVal, I'm gonna hold a gun to your head to propose to me.
Time out.
Also, let me finish. Also, I don't feel like I was adequately prepared for marriage.
I think what that clip highlights is like the problem with how men are sexualized or socialized around sex, right? In the clip it's saying, well, yeah, you pressured me towards monogamy because when I said I wanted children, and Kadeen says, well, you wanted children. I said that I was not going to have kids outside of marriage. That's how we ended up married, because we both agreed we wanted kids. That is not pressuring someone. That is not an ultimatum. The problem is Duvall did not say or present any other possibilities of how they could co-parent together. He did not present any other form of relationship. She said the ideal she had in her head. He did not present his ideal. And that is a shortcoming on his part of not understanding what he truly desires. And somebody said that he had cheated on her previously. I think a lot of men will reach for something more outside of their relationships, but not know what they're reaching for. This idea that are men built for monogamy? Are either gender built for monogamy? Are we built for monogamy on the way that we are sold monogamy, on this idea of like these high level individuals that we interact with that becomes our partner for a lifetime, right? Is anyone really built for that? And even if you are a person who likes the idea of being with one person, is it meant that you're meant to be with that one person for a lifetime? Is it meant that that one person can be your everything? I think there are a lot of ways in which we have room to expand our understanding of how monogamy does and doesn't benefit us, and how we desire to partner intimately with other people. But, Duvall in particular has a very prevalent shortcoming that I've often encountered in interacting with men who do not know how to articulate what they actually desire. What do you desire in the bedroom? What do you enjoy about sex? What makes sex fulfilling both with the person that you have chosen as your partner or the other people that you choose outside of your relationship? And particular to people that have been together for a long time, when a partner is unable to perform or not willing to perform, typically there are other things outside of the bedroom that are getting them. Because I'm watching that clip and I'm wondering, do you take care of your 3 kids? Are you badgering her about having a 4th child? And that will directly impact her desire to or to not have sex with you, because she definitely don't want to have a 4th child. How are you showing up? Even before we get to the idea, are you doing enough foreplay? Is the sex actually good? There are all these other things that go into the ways in which when we enter into the bedroom with another partner, that those energies exchange. When you think about vulnerability, right? Because sex is a very vulnerable act. This is where I landed on the idea that a lot of the ways we discuss sex is so performative, because we suggested this idea of getting to a very vulnerable place with someone, getting to a place where you can fully allow yourself to be seen, where you have shedded all the ways in which society puts expectations on you, which society binds you down and tells you you're not good enough, where you have let go of all those things. We talk about it as if it's simply like letting go of taking off your silk robe and letting it slink down sexually to your feet. And it's like, I'm here in all my full glory. And we always flatten everything to remove the idea that all these things take labor. All these things take work. And it's not going to be like a clean and pure process to get to that point. That you might trip up. You might do things that I wouldn't do that again. You might be a little awkward. You might be like, that's one thing I like about Insecure. They do show a lot of sex, but they also show, the characters are awkward. The characters are not performing this sort of perfect, the way Hollywood shows you sex is like this deep breathing and inhaling, this beautiful melody that plays in the background. And sometimes, you might move. You might just have weird thoughts happening. You might be unsure of yourself. It takes a work to get to these points of openness and readiness that I don't know that we really engage with the idea of what that sort of work looks like, because we want to sell everyone on this idea on wherever we land on the wavelength of the sex conversation, that us conducting the conversations are super good at sex. Some of us might, grow up in certain households where we never talked about sex. And so there is certain things, I don't think there's anything wrong with paying. Like there's a lady that I've seen on YouTube, a Black woman, who sells courses on the different positions and stuff, getting the books on it. I don't knock any of that. I want us to, before we start exploring those things, really to come into a confidence of ourselves and understand that as much as we tend to in society create all these hierarchies around values and how I can value myself over another person because I have this sexual liberation, ain't nobody doing nothing that special. I promise you. Ain't nobody doing nothing that special that you were not capable of doing. Sometimes we have this conversation from the liberated side of sex, always being such a sex positive experience, that what about people who don't desire sex? What about asexual people? What about people who are turned on or have these experiences of pleasure from non-phallic experiences, right? That don't necessarily derive pleasure from even penetration. Because we tend to talk about the conversation of sex and particularly sex positivity from such a place of how are you capable in the bedroom? How do you desire to perform for another person? What can you do to both turn yourself on and turn somebody else on? That we leave out this whole swath of people who are asexual and don't understand in ways in which they can derive pleasure from other experiences outside of the physical act of penetrating sex. I've mentioned this podcast, Esther Perel, Where Do I Want to Be? She had an episode with an Indian couple, and the wife, the traditional Indian Americans, they married each other because they were traditional, and the wife really didn't like sex. They had a child, and the husband was trying all these things to get his wife motivated around sex, but she just really didn't enjoy it. And Esther pointed out, this is when she was still doing in-person interviews. She's like, this whole interview, we've been sitting here and you keep patting your hair, you that's a masturbatory act. You do derive pleasure from touch. You have to think about the things that you do to soothe yourself and the ways in which I don't even think we are are we that in tune with our bodies that we understand the ways in which we bring our own selves pleasure, and that our ability to really tap into a genuine pleasure with other people first requires us to understand the ways in which we derive pleasure from ourselves. Thinking about the ways in which I soothe myself, the ways in which, when I'm in an anxious situation or I'm frustrated, the ways I calm myself down, the ways I bring myself back to peace. And that also helps me to understand, particularly in the bedroom, what do I enjoy? What are the things that really bring pleasure? And it's not that I need to be doing acrobatics or that I need to be choking on the dick. I think a lot of us don't even have the language to talk about what we like about sex because we don't think about the ways in which we seek pleasure from ourselves and the way in which we derive pleasure from our own bodies. And if you start there, then you can, curate more language around what is it about sex that you actually enjoy. But I'm going to log off here. Thank y'all. It's been great. Good night.